All right, well, we'll kick this off because we have a pretty good amount of folks with us already. And welcome, everyone. It is August, and I thought today would kick off with what was the last park that we visited and what stood out for us when we were there. And that for me was Wilshire Park on Sunday morning. We went for a walk. It was lovely. It was early. There was a dad with two sons. He was giving them batting practice. It was fun to watch him throwing pitches to these like 6 and 8-year-olds. And then we were walking around the other side of the park, and it was appreciative that everybody was observing appropriate physical distancing. So you can't always take that for granted. The previous day, I'd ridden my bike past Kenton Park, and there was just a whole group of people around a softball field not practicing social distancing. So I was like, ah. So that was my recent park experience and why it stood out. Who would like to share next?
I'll go.
Bonnie?
So good morning, everyone. I happened to take a long walk yesterday, and I went through both Wilshire Park and Grant Park. And it was really nice, actually, as we were heading east on, I think it was Shaver, or maybe the block north of Shaver. We could hear a lot of beeping and honking and stuff. So we were heading east, looking into the park, and we could see one old guy standing a Black Lives Matter sign. And we thought, oh, they're all honking for him in support of Black Lives Matter, and that's so wonderful. And as soon as we got out to 33rd, we actually saw it was probably about, I want to say 50 retired age people standing out there. So that was really nice. And I just found it really heartening because I think, you know, racial justice is long overdue. And I think what each of us can do to move towards that is really important. So thanks for the opportunity.
I can go ahead and go next. I, the other day, took a hike through the Arboretum in Washington Park. And what stood out to me was two things. One was just the sheer volume of people that were in the Arboretum, which kind of shows me just how many people really need to be outside and appreciate what we have in the area. Also, what surprised me somewhat was walking by the visitor center, the number of out-of-state license plates that I saw on cars in the parking garage. I was actually just a little bit surprised by that. So those were two of my observations.
Thanks, Mike.
This is Juan Mentino. I ride my bike to work to OHSU down Terwilliger Boulevard, and I go through several parks, George Himes Park and the park on Terwilliger, and it never ceases to amaze me how beautiful that area is, and that how fortunate Mark is such a great.
Thanks, Juan.
I'll go. This is, I don't know how many weeks ago, right after our the Parks Foundation retreat. We'd had a 4-hour Zoom meeting, and I was completely zoomed out, and sorry for the garbage trucks. I thought they would go away, but they've come back in the background here. Anyway, so I wandered over to Laurelhurst just to kind of clear my head, and somebody had set up a DJ station, and there were a whole, just kind of watched the slow gathering of Black and brown people. And then some poetry started and some music started, and pretty soon I looked around, and other than the protests, I had never seen so many Black and brown people in Laurelhurst Park just having fun. I mean, it was just such a great scene, just the fabulous, casual, totally unsanctioned happening there. People were dancing and just enjoying themselves, and it was really like, oh yeah, this is why I do this work. So it was really a great evening for me.
Cool, Randy. Thank you.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. I was at Clinton City Park, a very simple park by Franklin High School and Atkinson. And I grew up around there. I took my great nephews and my sister, a baby, my daughter from California. And we just had fun, kids riding bikes down a hill, as simple as that, playing tennis, teaching them, running a lot. And it was just a great evening, just sitting up on a hill, watching the sun go down. So that's my latest experience.
That sounds great, Katie.
I can go next. I've been spending a lot of time at Park Lane Park taking outside meetings there, which is pretty awesome actually. And it's fun. It's just such a neighborhood park. There's, you know, no matter what day it is or what time it is, there's people there hanging out with the boombox, having a barbecue. So just having meetings while people are having a good time and everybody wants to be in the shade. So we're all kind of under the picnic tables in the shade. But yeah, I just really appreciate how much that park is part of the fabric of the Rosewood neighborhood.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
Well, by contrast, I'll go next. By contrast, I haven't been anywhere at all except with virtual travel. That's my background. So there's my park and there's nobody else there.
Thanks, Patty.
I'll go. Good morning, everyone. This past weekend, I was at Selwood Riverfront Park, which, I mean, it was beautiful and there wasn't a lot of people, which I welcome for this time. It was a good reminder of that group of users that actually that have access to the river. It was pretty amazing to see how many people would actually were stand-up paddling and kayaking and just straight up swimming in the Willamette, which never ceased to amaze me. Yeah.
Thanks, Alejandro.
I can go next. This is maybe a negative surprise, but I live really close to Ed Benedict and Earl Boyles Park, and I have this running route that takes me through all of them, and Ed Benedict Park has like 3 different sections to it. But since I, took a week to just get out of the city and basically saw no one, since I got back, I've had a lot of anxiety around how many people are in the parks. And full disclosure, there's like 5 people in the parks and they're spread out. But I don't usually bring a mask because I'm running and I have a hard time breathing, but I'm 100% committed to just like running down a hill or, doing whatever I have to do. And there was a lot of doing that and a lot of anticipation. And I just felt like I was on edge during my runs. It's great to see a bunch of people in the park, but I need to think of an alternative so I'm not so anxious when I'm trying to get some morning exercise.
Thanks, Tamara.
I'll go next. Good morning, everybody. Me and my bike team met at Westmoreland Park on Sunday evening to all commiserate the canceling of the cyclocross season now that that's changed. But it was great to be at the park because there's construction going on there. So it was really assuring to see that we're still working on the parks, we're still improving them, and we're still doing what we can do to make them a great asset for the city. So it was reassuring to see the ongoing construction to fix Westmoreland's waterways and bridges.
Thanks, and sorry about the cross season being canceled. I love the cross crusade and especially the ride at Alpenrose. So yeah,
that's gonna be next year.
Yeah.
I can go next. It's Lorena. I moved to a new neighborhood in February, but most of my friends still live in Woodstock area. There's the area I used to live before. So last Saturday, we met to a social distance jam session at Brentwood Park, and it was fun.
Thanks, Lorena.
I can go next. This is Ian. Jake was I've been spending a lot of time on my bike, and even though I remember the hatred that was dropped on the Parks Board when the extension connection between the Sellwood Riverfront bike trail was connected more closely to the Springwater corridor. I love that, and I try to get down there several times a week, and there are always kids learning how to ride bikes or walking around. And it's just great to see tons of families out. I think that's a great addition, and it was worth the hatred that was directed towards us, as I recall.
Thank you, Ian.
It's Casey. I'll go with the Willamette Greenway at South Waterfront, which is just lovely. But they're putting in a huge new development there, a couple of blocks worth, which I'm reluctant to see go up, but at least there's going to be a connector that will be built as part of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing that happen.
Thanks, Casey.
All right, I'll go. Last week we went to Leach Botanical Garden with my mom and my daughter, my older daughter. And yeah, I think that place just always amazes me how close it is. I live in Southeast, so I always think it's going to be like someplace far away, but it's so close and just so much beautiful plants and trees and things and structures. So it's so relaxing there, and it was really felt there was hardly anybody there, but also just the structure of the leading you through the pathways. There were kind of one way, all the pathways are one-way direction now, which made it just very easy and safe to, my daughter's got a little, maybe like Tamara, my daughter's got a little anxiety getting near anybody. I might have put it in a little, taught her that a little too much because she freaks out if she gets anywhere near anybody. But yeah, it was really beautiful.
Thanks for sharing, Erin. Who haven't we heard from? Okay, I think we've got everybody from the board. Just any staff want to share from recent experiences? All right, it's a quiet group this morning. Well, thanks for sharing. It's great to hear those stories. So hopefully everyone had a chance to review the minutes from our meeting in July. And are there any questions about the minutes from July? If there's no questions, do I have a motion to approve our minutes?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, then all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, our minutes are passed. Thank you. That brings us to Adina's report. Good morning, Adina.
Good morning, everyone. I was going to wait and share my park story since I was going to have my report time. So ironically, I went through several parks today. Maricara Natural Area in Southwest for a trail run this morning. And then perhaps almost incredibly juxtaposed, I walked through Chapman Square this morning as well. And I was struck by how different the parks are being used. At Maricara, the neighborhood had set up a lending library at the entrance to the park with a bottle of sanitizer for people to take books and leave books. And walking through Chapman Square, you pretty much would need to walk over people who were sleeping on the street. So both serving very important and different roles for our citizens. So,
yeah, well, Thank you, Adina.
That was my bizarre sort of, I was like, oh, the last part. I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, that's very different. And it didn't really strike me as so different then, but in hearing the stories, it made me realize how I was able to experience two very different parks just this morning.
Wow.
I forgot my reading glasses this morning, so if if it looks like I'm angry, I'm just squinting.
I know what you mean.
So I just I wanted to take a few minutes to review and debrief a significant milestone. On July 22nd, City Council referred our parks operating levy to the November ballot. It will be on the November ballot as measure 26-213. I want to thank the Parks Board for your support, both in preparation for our work session with Council in November to begin the conversation about the Bureau service levels and financial realities, and for your support in leading up to the referral by City Council. If we had not had the foundation of our work last November, I don't know that we could have pivoted so quickly when our financial reality changed due to COVID-19 in order to put together a funding measure together for voters to consider this November. I'd also like to thank Bonnie G. Yosick, who testified on behalf of the Parks Board during the council meeting. Bonnie, thank you for speaking so eloquently on behalf of Parks and the Parks Board. We had a 3-0 vote to approve referral by our City Council, with Commissioner Hardesty not attending for the vote. I want to acknowledge that Commissioner Hardesty's commented on the engagement that PP&R had with her office. As this group knows, City Council has been involved in the Sustainable Future Work since November of 2019, and Portland Parks and Recreation and the Mayor's Office have been engaged with council members throughout this process. Earlier in the day, Commissioner Hardesty also subjected Portland Police Bureau's Chief Lavelle to negative public commentary. On the next day, Commissioner Hardesty shared an email with all city employees apologizing to myself and Chief Lavelle for her behavior. PP&R and the Mayor's Office will continue to work with all city commissioners as we continue this effort. In the short time frame we had between beginning to see the impact COVID would have on our service levels and finances and the deadline to get something referred for a November ballot, we began conversations with the community to learn about how the park system serves Portlanders and where we have work to do. These conversations are critical and are a priority regardless of our funding levels. We must do better to serve all Portlanders, especially Portlanders of color, Portlanders experiencing lower incomes, youth, our Indigenous communities, and immigrants and refugee communities. I've loved being able to connect, even by Zoom, with the community through these conversations. One of our last community conversations, organized by Sam Sabeti, had about 150 participants who were members of immigrant and refugee communities or organizations that provide services to immigrants and refugees. I look forward to participating in more conversations. COVID-19 has exposed and broken our recreation program's funding model. In addition, the pandemic will have significant impact on the city's general fund. As we move forward, our next months will be focusing on providing information about what the park system could look like with or without a levy. We've already gotten questions, and we know we will continue to get questions about exactly what it could look like for recreation and programming, for maintenance, and more if a levy is passed by voters. Developing an engagement plan that continues the community conversations we began over the last few months to better understand how parks can serve all Portlanders. We have a lot to learn from the community we serve, and we will be developing an engagement plan that provides a space for us to listen and share, and to ensure that our future budgets, whether or not a levy is supported by voters, centers equity and is responsive to community feedback. I think we have a little bit of time if anyone has any questions.
I have a question. This is Juan. please remind me, from now on, what advocacy work can we do for this? Can we even talk about it? There were some rules about what can we do or not do about this. I just want to make sure that I'm promoting this, but I'm within the legal framework.
So Juan, your question was very garbled for me. I don't know if there's a bandwidth issue or not.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, but I think I got the gist of it. And I'm gonna ask maybe Todd if you would just cover the do's and the don'ts, or Tim, either one.
Yeah.
One moment.
Hey, everybody. So I think it's important just to remember that as individuals, you can do what you please. We still have a U.S. Constitution here. So you can say what you want, you can give donations as you want, volunteer your time as you wish, but just don't represent that you're a Parks Board member in that discussion that you might be having with neighbors, that you're speaking on behalf of yourself as an individual, and then you're free to do as you wish. It's similar to us as city employees. During our work time, we can't work on the levy other than providing unbiased information to respond to people's questions or just to inform the general public about the levy itself. Similar to the remarks that Adina just had today, we had actually those remarks were reviewed by the city attorney's office. So we knew what side of the line. There wasn't a lot of advocacy language in her remarks because of that. And so we'll be very careful. But again, as city employees on our off time, once we clock out for the day, we're free just as you to volunteer or provide information, but we do that as individuals, and we can't represent, that we're working at parks and we have some special information because of that.
Yeah, and let me clarify or go a little bit further on one thing that Todd said. Nice haircut, by the way, Todd. I need to get mine done. Is that even saying I am a Parks Board member, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the Parks Board is a little bit too far, because then people's mindset will be that, oh, well, you are a Parks Board member, you have this extra knowledge or something. There's kind of an assumption there. So I would advise, if you are interested in doing any sort of advocacy on your personal time for or against the levy, to not even mention that you're a member of the Parks Board. I think it's safer and cleaner that way.
Thanks, Everett.
I have a question, not about that, just about the referral. So I think it might be helpful just for the Parks Board to, excuse me. So Commissioner Hardesty, just going back to Commissioner Hardesty, may have apologized for her delivery, but she's not taking back the content of what she said. And I think it might just be helpful to hear from the Parks Board perspective, what actions the Parks Bureau might be taking to make sure that key decision makers and stakeholders are kept in the loop at appropriate times going forward, whether it's regarding the levy or other things that might come up in the future.
Yeah, I can take that one, I think, and that's all right. Because I kind of see that as my role at Parks. Obviously, Adina has that role as well. So I'll just go back on the history a little bit for the levy. We did pre-briefings for the work session with the council offices before we even had the work session in November. Then, of course, we followed up with any questions that the council members had at the work session. We met with Commissioner Hardesty in March, gave her an update on the status because she didn't participate in the work session. So it was important for us to make sure that she understood, you know, if she didn't watch the work session herself, that she had that information. Again, we got some direction to zero in on the levy and bond, and we wanted to pursue polling. And so we actually asked the Fire Bureau to use their polling information. And they had a contract in place, and we ended up going with another contractor, but Commissioner Hardesty participated in that process. We met with her again in May, provided an update similar to you on what was happening with our budget, and we are pursuing polling on the levy and bond. Then after the levy results came back, we offered briefings to all of the council offices, including hers. She took up that and scheduled that meeting for June 30th, a date of her choosing. So she waited 3.5 weeks to have the briefing. Everett plays a role in providing information to council offices as our parks liaison. And so he also provides kind of staff to staff, peer-to-peer information to all the council offices as we go through major decision-making processes. And we do that for everything we bring to council. We send memos, information memos prior to decisions because Nick Fish taught us well. We do our homework in advance and provide lots of information. When we get to council, most of the questions and all of the material have been already pre-vetted. So what happened in that that council hearing, I've never participated in anything like that. I mean, I take it as a failing of my own role that a council member wouldn't have the information they wanted. We work for the city council. I'm an at-will employee working for the city council, for a city commissioner that's delegated by the mayor. So I don't know what to say other than we'll double down and provide every bit of information people want. I mean, yeah.
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I appreciate your thorough background. I think you hit all the meetings correctly. And as you mentioned, you know, one of my roles is to reach out to council offices and keep them informed and abreast of things that are going on in the bureau that I liaise with. And so I certainly did that by email and by phone call. Had several meetings with Commissioner Hardesty that Todd mentioned, and with her staff, shared email updates. So there was a line of communication, whether the things were scheduled by her scheduler at the appropriate time, or whether her staff filtered up important information to her at the right time. I'm not sure. That may have played a factor, but I don't know. You'd have to ask her staff about that. But like Todd said, we're certainly going to continue doing our due diligence to make sure that everyone on council is informed of our great work and of our challenges.
And I guess I'll just add one more thing that Everett said is, so the chiefs of the council offices used to meet every Friday. I don't know, are they meeting every day still? Everett, how often are they? Is it just on Fridays?
They're not meeting every day, but it's I think it's at least once a week, if not twice.
Right. So the chiefs on the Friday before council, they meet, go over all the council items, pre-vet them. The Monday before, now we're talking 10 days before, all the staffers like Everett, they meet, policy people, vet all the information that's coming to council, talk about the different policies. There are no surprises at city council. It may seem that way sometimes because that's politics, but there are no surprises at city council.
Well, thanks, Todd and Everett, for that background information. It's really helpful. And, you know, it's still challenging. Communication is always challenging. In this pandemic, it's even more challenging. So I think the takeaway lesson from here is just we need to be very clear about our communication. And I want to direct a question to the team about going forward in terms of the messaging. I'm curious what our top 3 bullet points would be for what Parks looks like with the levy passing and what happens if the levy doesn't pass.
Thanks for that. So actually, it's very good timing, that question, Paul. We are working a small group to talk about the next steps and also about producing and what community engagement around the levy looks like. And we will have to have all documents vetted, just like my remarks this morning were vetted. So you'll hear from us before the next Parks Board meeting, probably via email on that topic.
And I can just add to that, the Budget Advisory Committee meeting that will be later this month. We have to submit a balanced budget for this fiscal year. So as many of you know, we're basically revamping this year's budget, be able to do that. And so that will give you a picture of what it looks like without a levy. And so we'll be working, we're still working over the next couple of weeks to refine, you know, all of that. But the Budget Advisory Committee will go over that at the end of this month.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks, Adina, as well. Yeah, I think it's going to just be really critical that we develop those bullet points and really hone the messaging so that we can be clear with folks. I think there's just so much out there in the world right now that it's hard to get people's attention. And so we've got to make sure that our communication is very clear and concise. So that's what I'm wanting for us to do, you know, going forward, so that we can be successful and see this levy pass and see a recreation program next year and just better maintenance in our parks and all those things that we know would occur as a result of the levy. And just finding how to communicate that in a way that resonates with the community or the communities. It's not just one monolithic community, of course, but many communities out there. Any other questions? We have a few more moments for this agenda topic.
Paul,
all right, well, we'll keep.
I just
Hi,
want to
Katie.
give, I would just like to thank Adina. She made time to meet with the Native American Advisory Committee this last month and shared with us information that was real important to our committee. So I just want to give her a big thank you for coming and joining with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I was happy to do it. And I appreciate the time that NATAC carved out in their very busy agenda. So appreciation.
Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. All right, let's move on to our working group reports. And leading us off would be Tamara this morning.
Good morning. I'm still waking up. That's why I'm not having my camera on, so I can yawn a lot. Not a whole lot of changes with the community development working group yet. I'm going to have Alejandra and Pune help lead a session, just kind of a brainstorm discussion session sometime in the next couple months, hopefully, which will be a bigger group. And I hope that a lot of you will join to help us kind of craft what we want another working group maybe to look like. But until then, we're kind of just on pause. There's a lot of different interests, and you know, people are also just really busy. And I think this is really important work, but it's not as important as, you know, maintaining your strength and sanity to do some other things. So that's my little update.
Thank you, Tamara. Okay, then we'll shift over to Mike in the Financial Sustainability Working Group.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Just a couple of things. As was noted in Adina's report that went to everybody, the Bureau came out within budget for the last fiscal year, which is great news. Golf had a record year. PIR had some challenges just because of their inability to have spectator events in the latter part of the year. One thing I did want to comment on that I thought was kind of interesting was the revenues from system development charges were $21 million last year, whereas the year before they were 28, and the year before that they were 40. And that's, from what I understand, more of a function of the prior years being unusually high, and not so much that this last year was an off year. So I think it was a more typical year. But given that, I think Parks is going to be a little bit more conservative with starting new projects in the next year or two because of the uncertainties that exist. But there shouldn't be any issues with completing any of the existing projects that are in the pipeline. As it results to planning for the fall bump, I covered most of that on the last call, so I don't think we need to get into that. Adina had some comments on it in her report as well. One thing I wanted to make people aware of is I guess there was a memo that went from Parks to the mayor's office earlier this month that there were 3 themes that I think are pretty important to know about. One is that there was the suggestion that it doesn't make a lot of sense right now to be looking at any staff reductions. And more importantly, that staff be aware of this. So given all the uncertainties that are going on, I just wanted to make sure that the staff was aware that that's not something that's being looked at this point. Also that the Bureau also wants to approach recreation services with a little bit more flexibility and without the pressure to necessarily open facilities as fast as possible. And then finally, should the levy pass, that the Parks is going to want to get approval for what's essentially a bridge loan to borrow against the upcoming levy proceeds so that they can start funding some recreation services a little bit prior to when those funds are actually coming in from the levy. So I haven't actually seen the memo. Hopefully I've captured the spirit of it, and somebody from staff can correct me when I'm done if I didn't get it quite right. And then just a couple of comments on sustainable future. Adina talked a little bit about the community engagement plan, so I don't think I need to touch on that. One of the working group's goals for the next couple of months is to better understand a little bit better, assuming the levy passes, or if it passes, where those levy proceeds would go. And obviously that's a work in process and nothing's nailed down, but it sounds like at a high level right now, about 1/3 of those proceeds would go towards restructuring the fees and subsidizing some fees. And that's obviously going to be dependent a little bit on the community engagement process. And the other 2/3 is going to be more about just taking care of the park system and the natural areas within the parks and the urban forest canopy. That's basically what I have. I hope I've captured everything that staff told me about the memos properly, but if not, feel free to jump in. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Any comments from Todd or Everett or others?
I just wanted to clarify the note about full-time permanent reductions is what's in the memo, but we will have our normal seasonal scale down. So we have seasonal employees that come in on the spring, work through the summer, work through the beginning of fall, and then are laid off. And so we will have that typical cycle. So we will have, for instance, some seasonal rangers and seasonal maintenance workers that historically are laid off in the fall, and that will continue.
Thanks, Todd.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you for the report. I think it was really good. I just wanted to add and kind of reiterate that another thing that did come up was the committee, or we're interested, as I think a lot of people are, in getting a little bit more specificity on how the levy funding will be used. And, you know, some of the things that we've been talking about for a couple of years as a board, we would like to see how they might get implemented. Some of the things relating to, for example, tiered pricing, voluntary sliding fee scale, that a few of us have been mentioning for a couple of years, which are not really analytic issues so much as just getting it implemented, and seeing how that can be done and how that plays into the overall business plan. So I just wanted to point that out, but thanks for the great report.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. I think that is something that is important. And we have had conversations about it, that there are people within the community that can pay above the standard pricing that Parks has had for programs. So some sort of system where we can allow people to pay what they're able to pay, and then support those who don't have the means to engage in programs. And I think we've even talked about the attraction of things like free swimming lessons for children as being something that could be supported that way.
I wanted to hop in on a couple of points here. Bonnie, I saw you asked a question in the chat. If someone asks if someone knows that you're a Parks Board member and asks if you're speaking on behalf of the board, it's fine to respond and say that no, you are not speaking in your capacity as a board member. And that's a clear enough line if they ask you. Wanted to also offer that the mayor's office has received the memo from Parks with their preferred direction, and the mayor is in the process of reviewing that memo. And I think he will, of course, be supportive and excited to see that there are no planned permanent staff reductions, but wanted to temper that by saying that he hasn't had a chance to review it yet, but will shortly, and may have some more feedback or clarity as to how the Bureau should think about the budget. But I think it will be very, very positive on the great work that they've done so far. And I think that was it. Thanks.
Thanks, Everett. Any other questions on financial sustainability? All right, that brings us to land use and infrastructure and a report from Patty.
Thank you, Paul. There are several items, so I'll just touch on them quickly and respond to any questions anyone may have. First one is the I-5 quarter project, Rose Quarter project rather. ODOT is going ahead with its utility location studies and its soil sampling. They've got a general contractor under contract, so they're moving forward. As far as I know, the other studies on the lids for the freeway has not got going yet. The consultants are under contract, but they've not got a notice to proceed. So we're just watching that one, and we will report back as things unfold. The second topic is the South Park blocks, the master plan for the South Park blocks, which the work group reviewed. The focus really is on replacement planting of the trees which are nearing the end of their life, and accommodation of the green loop and other pedestrian and bicycle facilities through the South Park blocks. The Downtown Housing Association has lodged a historic district nomination reportedly for the purpose of stopping the South Park blocks plan from proceeding any further. So once again, we're watching that very carefully, and we'll report back on anything that there is to report. Third thing is the South Reach plan, which I think I reported to you last month. I think that the park interests, limited retail in the parks, habitat on the banks, and so forth, is all in good shape. The real issue is destructive wakes for wakeboarding, and that really is an issue not for parks or even for the city, but for the State Maritime Board to address. And there's no news on that yet. So again, we'll watch that and report back. Off-road cycling master plan, which you remember was a huge furore, particularly its affected Forest Park. That is with the Planning Bureau, and we don't expect to hear anything new on that until the end of this year, beginning of next year. There's a new entrance to Forest Park being proposed. The Unico has done a development plan for the Montgomery Ward site, which is 17.5 acres, and they're proposing a new entrance to Forest Park. And adjacent to it will be the terminus of a new streetcar link between the Hollywood district and the Montgomery Ward, 27th and Northwest Wilson. So again, that's a very broad plan. Implementation is likely to be 20 years or some 15 to 20 years out. So again, we're watching it carefully. We're very interested, obviously, in having a new entrance to the park. The last issue I'll touch on is OMSI, which, as you may know, is developing a master plan for its properties and is working with the city to look at restoration of littoral plantings and habitat along the river's edge, and that will be publicly accessible. It'll also be the subject of teaching based in OMSI, but really looking at different plant communities and habitats that were there before the development of the city. One other issue which is coming up is that tomorrow the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability will be talking about the West Portland Downtown Center Plan along the Southwest Corridor Max line, and we anticipate quite a bit of work there. So that's our report, and I'll happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Patty. Any questions on land use and infrastructure? All right, well, we'll move to Bonnie with her process improvement program report.
Thank you. So the tree planting process improvement group met for the first time on the 29th. And it's an amazing group, you guys. It's, you know, a lot of the people who've been parks activists for eons. Some of you will know a lot of their names, but also a lot of like really great, smart new people. So I was really impressed with the group. I can send the roster out if you guys are interested, but it's being facilitated by Jennifer Allen from PSU. I think I mentioned that last time. And Vivek, who's the urban forestry chair, is also kind of helping to steer that group. So I mentioned we're having a series of 3 meetings that Jennifer Allen is sort of facilitating. And the first meeting we had, and we really talked about, you know, there's sort of the BAC style engagement process. So the first meeting really emphasized sort of goals and priorities and what was important to the community in terms of the tree planting program overall. So we split up into 2 smaller groups and talked about those things. And they ranged from everything from, you know, making sure that the elements that are positive in the way the programs are running now with the 2 separate bureaus aren't lost, to, you know, further improving equity and accessibility and efficiencies, of course. So that was about it. We have our 2 later meetings later this month, and I'll keep you guys posted. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And if Todd and Jen were also present as staff observers, so I don't know if they have anything that they want to add.
Thanks, Bonnie. Any questions for Bonnie? All right. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome Pat Frobes back with us today to give us an update on our bylaws. We've met with Brooke and Linda Law and reviewed the comments that Linda Law had, and I think we're in a pretty good place based on what was circulated by Brooke on Friday. And Pat's going to lead us through the discussion, review of the proposed bylaws, and then assuming that we don't have major questions, we're going to vote on our bylaws.
Okay, go. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see all of you. Just to review the bidding a little bit for everybody, but particularly the new members. This project started about a year ago plus. There were two kind of motivating forces that came together. One, I think the board wanted to streamline the bylaws, make them more consistent with how the board actually operated, and to make explicit the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion, which in many instances weren't explicitly called out in the bylaws. At the same time, just coincidentally, the Office of Civic Life was coming up with a template to be used as guidance for all advisory boards in creating their bylaws. And they have asked advisory boards with existing sets of bylaws to conform their documents as much as appropriate to the template provided by their office. So those two things came together, resulting in probably not as streamlined as we would like, because I think the template ended up adding a lot of other provisions, but they were important in terms, particularly in terms of conflict of interest and public meeting, public officer, open meeting kind of requirements. The significant thing that the template included, that I think I mentioned in the cover memo, which we did not include in the revision, was a provision permitting the commissioner in charge to dismiss board members for any reason at any time in his or her discretion. That's not something that is in our current bylaws, and I think is inconsistent for a board that is appointed by the city council, the entire council and not just commissioner. The second thing was a provision that basically said that only the commissioner could revise the bylaws and had to approve any revision that came from any other source, and we don't have that currently, and again did not include that, thinking that really wasn't consistent with an independent advisory board appointed by the city council. So those are the most significant omissions from the template. I think the most significant things that we changed otherwise outside of the template, as I said, is the including the values of equity, diversity, inclusion more explicitly, making it explicit that one of the board's responsibilities, in addition to monitoring the strategic plan, is to monitor compliance with the racial equity plan. And then procedural things such as creating a single two-year term for officers as opposed to one-year terms with an option for an additional renewal. The prior board did review this draft, gosh, I don't remember when, but it was probably last fall, and approved the form and the draft for delivery to the city attorney for her comments. We got her comments back, which were pretty much just clarifying what was already in the city code and what wasn't. And we've made the changes she requested. So I think after discussion, there are really two issues. One, as I noted, some of these suggested changes will require changes to the city code, which means going to council with a request to change the ordinance. And others the board can do on its own without city council action. So I think the first is whether the board wants to proceed with requesting changes from the city council, and whether you approve the changes in general. Maybe I got that in reverse order. The changes are acceptable, and then do you want to proceed to ask the city council for changes in the ordinance? So with that, any questions?
Thank you, Pat. I want to start off by saying I really appreciate that your cover memo used our what, so what, now what format. And for new board members, this is a great opportunity to share that. This is a way of communicating that we developed during the last couple of years of board, of really trying to cut to the chase in terms of relevance. So what is the topic? So what? Why are we talking about it? And now what? What's our action? And so I really appreciate Pat putting it in that format. It's a great format, and I look forward to us embracing it going forward. So thank you, Pat, for doing that.
Sure.
And then, you know, my own personal thoughts on this are that, you know, we've invested a good amount of time on this, and we've talked extensively with Linda Law. For those of you who don't know, Pat practiced as a lawyer for many years, so this is very well founded, and I'm very inclined to move this forward. But if there's questions, we certainly want to address those to make sure that everyone's comfortable with them.
Well, this is Casey, and I'm late to the process, and I now am much more appreciative of how much work has gone into this. And maybe it's just because I was a lawyer for a long time, but I had two areas of questioning that I had after I read them. And I do appreciate all the work that's happened before here. The first question I have is really in sections 1.2 and 5.1, which talks about our duties. And particularly in 1.2, which talks about the bullet points for the vision that we're supposed to follow. I don't think the vision talks anything about equity, but I do think equity should be something that we think of in everything we do. So I had a suggestion, because I'm so late in the process, I might just throw it as a thought, that maybe instead of a separate bullet point for equity, that we have it at the end of that section as something that applies to all the bullet points, where it's either, you know, the same sentence or something that ties back into the equity plan. But the idea is, it wasn't part of the 2020 vision, but it should be something that's part of everything we do. So it would be not a separate bullet point, but something that covers all the bullet points in the vision. And then the other question I really had was about working groups that the chair appoints. And I'm a big proponent of transparency, and I was a little concerned about the chair not being required to disclose findings or comments from a working group. And I just wonder how that goes into our requirement for the need to disclose that we have in section 7.1. And again, I apologize for being late to the party. I really appreciate all the work that's been done, but those are my thoughts.
I think that's a great suggestion on the 2020 vision. That really that's a very good, elegant solution to that problem. And that's an easy change to make. On the working groups, Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just silent on disclosure. Is that correct, or is there an affirmative?
I think there was an I got to juggle here a little bit, but I think there was an affirmative statement that there wasn't a requirement to disclose. It was up to the discretion of the chair to disclose, which I thought ran counter to the requirement of disclosure in 7.1. I can flip back and forth and find it for you.
Well, again, I think it's fine to have disclosure. Paul, you want to respond to that? Again, that's an easy change to make. I can't find the language.
Our approach is to be transparent in our dealings. So I think we want to affirm that we do disclose what happens in working groups. So yeah, I think it's a totally appropriate recommendation for change, and I support it. So yeah, this is good feedback, Casey. So you're not late to the game. This is why we wanted to bring it to the board, and appreciate that you've read it thoroughly and have made very constructive suggestions for change.
Thank you. And Pat, it's in section.
Got it.
Yeah, it's halfway through. It's the chair's discretion. Yeah.
Got it.
So are there other questions or comments about what we've presented today? If not, what I'm going to propose is that we make those changes and we can spare Pat coming back, unless you really want to come back, Pat, and you'd be very welcome to come back. And we can make those changes and vote on that in our September meeting. But I'm very curious if there's other thoughts or suggestions in terms of any final tweaks to our bylaws.
Well, Tamara put something in the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the comment I made in the general chat that I can just ask about. Just wondering what disclosure means. I know we take meeting minutes here, but that's because we have a quorum. So I guess I'm curious what it would look like for working groups.
I think what we can do, I think one, the overall goal would just be that the board chair would report. I don't know if we want to, I think we should leave it the form of the report, because part of our notion for working groups and part of the goal was to get away from a lot of the formality required for committees of minutes and all of that kind of thing. So I think it should be worded in a way that basically says the board chair will periodically bring information compiled by the working groups to the board for their information. And then I think the form of that report, how that happens, is up to the board in any particular instance. Does that make sense, Tamara?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just for clarity, with our regularly scheduled agenda items for the working groups, we are disclosing. So that's my interpretation of how we're sharing that information. Exactly. Yeah.
So Paul, I wanted to clarify. So it sounded like what Pat was saying was there's a subset of the revisions that we can vote on and adopt on our own. And then there's another subset that requires a change to the overall boards and commissions ordinance that we can't adopt on our own. So I think you might need to split apart what you were proposing there about the next meeting. Is that correct, Pat?
Yes, that is correct.
Good clarification, Bonnie. Thank you.
Hi, Pat, you might, I wonder if my question will be actually related with the document, the revision of the document itself, but here it goes. I totally appreciate the idea of trying to include this equity lens to our bylaws, and I think it's very much needed. My one concern is that given basically the structure of the board and the resources available, we're not really building on the capacity to actually support those equity efforts. So my concern is that this is just like a statement of good intentions that not really helping us moving forward. So when I look at the bylaws, really I'm understanding that really the only source of resources that we have is the support from staff person from parks. I wonder if there's room there to include some language about that technical support, or also include some equity training for the board.
That's a really good point, Alejandro. Some of us, myself and Bonnie, attended equity, diversity, and inclusion training that was sponsored by the foundation a couple of years ago, and it was a really good training. It's training that the city's, I'm blanking on the name of the entity within the city that sponsors it, but it's a half-day training, and it was very helpful. It was very informative. So I would, as a gesture or as an actual concrete step towards this, I would recommend that all of us take advantage of those offerings in the future. Yeah, so that's at least a first step. Alejandro, do you feel like that is going in the right direction in terms of where your point is being made?
Yes, I think it definitely goes in the right direction, and hopefully all of us have been able to have access to some sort of training in the past and in the future. I'm just wondering whether that's something that we would like it to be formally reflected in the bylaws.
Yeah, just to second that and say that I think these trainings have been, I think, recommended to us for at least a few months. I remember getting the email from Brooke outlining some times and things like that. But I think I can almost guarantee that not all of us have been to them, even though they are recommended. And this isn't to shame people, but I think it's, you know, we're busy and, you know, there's things on our minds. So I guess I'm curious how we could move forward with really trying to commit ourselves to taking at least one of those trainings or some training that you can articulate what you learned, what you maybe didn't learn. And I think Alejandro's point is a good one. As more people get on the board, what kind of training should we really emphasize that you should have coming on this board or really pursue once you're on it?
There's no reason that the bylaws couldn't. I mean, couldn't one, if the board chooses, require participation as a condition of your membership on the board. There's just like there is a requirement to attend a certain number of meetings, or kind of a negative requirement that if you miss so many meetings on a 12-month thing that you can be asked to reconsider your commitment. So that's number one. And number two, in the staff liaison and support section, there isn't any reason why this is probably an easier add in terms of thinking through what you want to do, that the Bureau will make available to the board members, you know, and equity, diversity and inclusion training, or however we want to phrase that, as those sessions become available, as the Bureau is offering them, as part of the staff support. But that's up to the board whether you want to, how you want to proceed on that. There's no, the bylaws can accommodate that suggestion easily.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, well, clearly we're not going to vote today, and we'll make some changes and bring it back to the board. I think we should have an offline conversation about how we can take advantage of trainings that are offered through the city, whether we do that as individuals attending those, or whether we make a more direct commitment by bringing those trainings to the board. So that's a conversation that I'd like to have offline with folks. But yes, I think these are good suggestions that we've heard from everyone, and I'm looking forward to incorporating them. All right. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. That was good conversation. And I should mention finally that Brooke spent an awful amount of time, good time, but a lot of time trying to merge the template and our bylaws. And so she's owed a big thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Brooke serves this board really, really well, and doesn't get the credit that we really could give her for all the assistance that she provides. But thank you for pointing out in this instance, she did go the extra mile, and I think it was at least an extra mile to wade through the City Life template. And it certainly made life easier for Pat and myself. And so a big shout out to Brooke for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep moving. It's time for the report from Randy on the Parks Foundation.
Sure, I'll be brief. I have a date with a dentist I have to get to. So let's see, August, Foundation's been doing a series of candidates forum, and the last one was on August 11th with Dan and Loretta, who I guess will find out who's going to win today. One of them made a big leap forward during that particular forum because we did polling at the start of the evening, or start of the happy hour, and at the end of the happy hour, and the numbers changed quite a bit in favor of Dan. So we'll see what happens. Loretta didn't convince the Parkies. We're going to do another one with Chloe Udaly and Mingus Maps on, I hope, September 28th. I'm trying to confirm that right now. So that should be interesting. And tomorrow night, we are doing our second Pints for Parks evening, which is kind of a fundraiser that we've been doing. And our guests are Jack Jewsbury, the famous timber star, who's also on our board. Fresh after the championship game today, so that should be kind of interesting. But then also Vicente Harrison, who is a Parks employee, worked his way up to being head of the Park Rangers and now emergency management. And he's also a children's book writer, and he's going to talk about his experience with PPR and as a Black man in nature. That's one of his children's book is about kids of color and nature. And so that should be a fun evening of soccer and parks and just a good time. We worked with Gigantic Brewery to brew up a special beer, a Pints for Parks beer, which if you had registered early enough, you get it delivered to your door. I think you can still pick them up actually at Gigantic if you're interested. And so that's it for our events, or at least our sort of fun and interesting forum happy hour events. We're working arduously on our first Friends Summit, which will be on September 26th. I see Adina in the chat room, got her gigantic case last night. Thank you, Adina. Excellent. Anyway, the Friends Summit will be on September 26th. Jessica, my colleague, is working very hard on that. And we are going to do, it's going to be a Zoom meeting, and we'll be doing some stuff on the levy. And then we're going to do a series of breakout sessions on communications, fundraising, getting a friends group started, taking the next step with a friends group, overcoming difficulties that some of the ones that have been around for a while have been having. We formed a steering committee of several friends organizations, friends and allies organizations, to kind of shape the program. We're also doing a breakout session on inclusive culture, which creating an inclusive culture, which a lot of people were very interested in. And then we're also doing a day of service with that, which will be a separate day. Sorry, the garbage trucks just keep coming. I don't know if you guys can hear those. It's just ridiculous this morning. It's really amazing how many are here. Anyway, the day of service is still sort of taking shape, but the idea is to do small groups of 10 people or less per the current restrictions to do volunteer work in some of the underserved parks. So we think it'll be a great, we hope weekend, we hope the day of service will be a Saturday, the 26th will be the Friends Summit, the Zoom meeting, and then we hope Sunday will be the day of service, but we're still kind of working out the details of that. Otherwise, we're working extremely hard on the levy, but I have my Parks Board hat on. So I won't talk much about that here. Any of you who are interested in knowing more, please just get in contact with us. Happy to provide more information and to tell you how you might be able to be involved, as of course not wearing your Parks Board hat. So any questions?
Thanks, Randy. That was a great update.
Okay. Hope to see you all on Zoom tomorrow night for Pints for Parks.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move on now to some progress reports, and we're going to start with Nicola. Are you with us, Nicola?
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for having me here today. I think a lot of you know me, but for those of you who don't, I'm Nicola Sisson, and I'm a program specialist, and I work with Todd Lofgren, mostly kind of at the nexus of planning and communications and budget. And the Bureau regularly talks about its strategic plan, and we've been kind of doing updates over the last year to see if we're on track and how we might change the course of our direction. And last week, Brooke sent you with the agenda kind of an update on the 36 initiatives that are included in the plan. So that had a fair amount of detail in it if you had a chance to review. Today, I'm just going to kind of talk about our progress high level and some of our accomplishments and challenges. And then if you guys want a kind of a more in-depth discussion of a particular initiative, we could set up a briefing for a future board meeting. I just have about 9 minutes, and then Riley Clark Long and Kenya Williams will talk about the Portland Parks and Recreation's 5-year racial equity plan, including Kenya's thoughts on the future kind of that work for the Bureau, even though he's only been here for a month, so go easy on the future part for him. And there'll probably be some time for questions and clarifications. So let's get started. I'm going to try to share my screen and manage a double screen, so let's see what happens here. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's just talk a little bit about our planning context before we get started. We've been served by a robust planning framework. We have a 2020 vision that's historically been a 15-year plan. And then our strategic plans range from 3 to 5 years and serve as a stepping stone to the larger vision. In 2015, we created our first 5-year racial equity plan. And then the Bureau also has annual work plans that align the Bureau's work across our divisions and also with other city bureaus. All of our plans are due for a refresh, which gives us kind of an exciting opportunity to re-examine where we are and where we're going. Before we talk a little bit about our successes and our challenges, I just want to set a little context about all the things that have happened from 2017 to 2020. I've only been around since the fall of 2018, and a lot has actually happened already in less than 2 years. We've had 3 directors, 3 commissioners in charge, including the untimely death of Nick Fish. 6 out of 8 of the members of our executive team are brand new. We've had a major budget crisis. We implemented that crisis and then began talking about our sustainable future. In the end of January this year, we submitted a budget that looked like a relatively great budget compared to the year before. But in the next 6 months from there, over the last 6 months, we moved our central office from the Congress Center to the Portland building. We pivoted our entire operation to address a global pandemic, closed our community centers and canceled programs. We conceived of, pulled for, asked for, and received a referral for a ballot measure for a 5-year operating levy. And as much of this is happening, we've been dealing with nightly protests in support of Black Lives Matter, which affects, as you know, our Bureau's work and also our staff members personally. So we know that you know this, but it's been quite a ride over the last couple of years, and I think we've made amazing progress. So let's just talk a little bit about what is in the Bureau's strategic plan and how it's organized. We have 4 major focus areas, which you can see on the slide. Stewardship of land and natural resources, access to recreation programs, quality built assets, and enhancing organizational effectiveness. There were 9 outcomes identified within those 4 areas, and then the 36 strategic initiatives, which you received the summary for. Of the 36, 8 are really directly from our 5-year racial equity plan. So the racial equity plan is embedded somewhat in this, and there's overlap between these 2 plans. After Director Long joined the Bureau, we worked on our update and kind of started looking at where the plan was, what the timelines and milestones were, and then also assessed kind of the progress of each initiative. Initiative status was characterized as complete, on track, or on track with caution, which normally means that it's moving forward, but that maybe the timeline is extended, on hold, or not started. Last fall, we met to talk about the things that were on hold or not started to see where we could make progress or redirect priorities. Some of those things became things that we move forward, like the data collection for recreation, and some of those things did not move forward due to lack of resources or staff resources. So we can kind of look at how we've done overall. Sorry, 2 screens. As you can see, overall, out of our 36 initiatives, 24 are complete or on track, which is 67%. Some of the on-track initiatives will live beyond 2020, which some that was by design and some were due to delays. But most of the things in this 67% will be completed or mostly completed this year or in the near future. 12 out of the 36 initiatives, or 33%, are on hold or not started, and that's mostly due to a lack of funding or staff resources. If we look at only the 18 strategic plan initiatives that come from the racial equity plan, the status is exactly the same. 67% are complete or on track, and 33% are on hold or not started, which was nice because I didn't even have to make another slide. And now we could look at how that progress breaks down by focus area. And then I'll just talk really a little bit about what kind of the highlights are or successes in each focus area are, and maybe where we haven't done what we wanted to do. So in the stewardship area, out of 6 total initiatives, 3 are completed or on track, and 3 are on hold or not started. We've completed the citywide tree planting strategy that prioritizes low canopy and low income neighborhoods. We've completed 70% of our sustainable landscapes initiative. We have not yet developed maintenance standards for parks, trails, and natural areas, and we haven't updated the urban forestry management plan. In the access to recreation focus area, there's 6 total initiatives. 5 are completed or on track, and 1 is on hold or not started. We've created and implemented a successful cost recovery program for our preschool. And last year we ended with 416 students, which is a 90% registration rate, and provided nearly $50,000 in scholarships for 58 students. We have established equity-focused program models for Summer Free-for-All and for Gateway Discovery Park. We have created outreach plans to increase participation by BIPOC individuals in our aquatics programs. And as I said, we're ready to reinstate our data collection effort in recreation. Our recreation scholarship policy was put on hold due to a lack of stable funding. So that's the thing that was put on hold, but that will be most likely addressed now as part of our future plans. Under our quality built assets focus area, 4 out of 4 initiatives are complete or on track. We are on track to establish new design specifications for our park facilities, which will be complete in 2022. We're on track to finish our bond projects transparently and responsibly. As you know, we've received positive audits and also positive reports annually from our Community Oversight Committee. And we've completed asset standards for 72% of our asset categories. So good work there. In our organizational effectiveness Focus area, we had the most initiatives, 20 total out of 36. 12 are completed or on track, and 8 are on hold or not started. We have made tons of progress in this area with projects related to hiring, onboarding, training, and improving safety for staff. Those are all on track to meet their objectives. And then last fall, we hired an equity and inclusion team member and a training coordinator in workforce development. And those 2 positions have really helped move our language access projects forward, and also are devising more robust training programs for PP&R teams. The level of service studies are in progress, and a 15-year demographic forecast is currently being drafted. The initiatives around creating a bureau-wide marketing plan, implementing a customer relations management system, and creating updated graphic standards manuals are on hold due to lack of resources. And with regard to our bureau planning efforts, as you know, our primary focus has been pursuing financial stability through the Sustainable Future effort. And this effort informs a lot of our mid to long-term planning moving forward. So I've prepared an executive summary of the plan status, and we'll share it with you this week. But this is kind of just a high level that kind of lets you know where we are and what direction we're going in. And I don't know if you have any questions.
Nice presentation, Nicola, and the executive summary sounds wonderful. So thank you for your thoughtfulness that way.
Thanks, Paul.
Any questions? We're a quiet group this morning.
Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thanks,
so
Nicola.
Next up, we've got Riley Clark-Long and Kenya Williams for the Racial Equity Plan update.
Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. These are 2 new faces for you, relatively, me and Kenya. I'll start out here doing a kind of similar thing as Nicola with an overview of a recent progress report for our 5-year racial equity plan, and then Kenya will come in and introduce himself and share some thoughts about the future and the vision. And he's seen this plan in the beginning as a equity inclusion coordinator 4 or 5 years ago when he worked for Parks originally, and now he's seeing it kind of at a different stage in its life. So he's got great insight on this. So I'll see if I can share my screen too. Let me know. Is that appearing for folks?
Yes.
Yes, we can see that.
Great. So like Nicola had mentioned, my name is Riley Clark-Long. I am the Workforce Development Analyst here at Parks. So I work with Margaret Evans' team as part of the Operations and Strategies Division, ultimately. And so I'll just jump right in and refresh all our memories about what is in our 5-year racial equity plan and how it came to be. The planning process began in 2015 for this document, where the City of Portland Office of Equity and Human Rights began working with all city bureaus to develop each of their own 5-year racial equity plans. They gave us an organizational assessment tool called the Racial Equity Roadmap. We used that and results from that to engage over 100 park staff in some focus group exercises. And then of course, as a result of that engagement and then the hard work of the equity and inclusion team back then, some analysts, coordinators, and then our own leadership and management, we came out with a really, really robust document. It launched in 2016. And so being in the 5-year plan, that means that 2021 upcoming year is its last year. And like I said, it's a very robust plan. And what I mean by that is it's organized into 6 overarching objectives, which match or correlate with the city's own 6 citywide racial equity goals. Then it breaks down into 22 strategies and finally 100 pretty detailed action items. So it's a wide scope and very aspirational. And as you heard from Nicola, the equity plan is connected to our current strategic plan, and there's 18 of those initiatives that she was speaking of from the strategic plan exist as action items within this, 100 of those action items within this racial equity plan. So that maintains the connection between those two efforts. Another way to think about what is in the plan is thinking about those 6 overarching objectives that I mentioned. They really guide the process and give us a glimpse at what this plan really gets at. So I'll just quickly go through these. The first is to implement the citywide racial equity goals and strategies at all levels. Second objective is to represent the racial diversity of the city of Portland throughout recruitment, hiring, retention, and advancement in decision-making. Third objective is to provide culturally and linguistically appropriate marketing and outreach. Fourth is to develop a language access plan and use data to ensure projects, programs, policies, and practices are culturally and linguistically responsive. Fifth is to provide equitable access to developed parks, natural areas, programs, and services. And then last but not least is to meet or exceed citywide contracting goals for minority women and emerging small businesses. And that's the text from the original plan. That acronym has grown to become more inclusive over the last 4 or 5 years. So later when I mention our progress when it comes to contracting, I'll use the bigger acronym, the bigger tent acronym. Another way to think about what is in this plan is by breaking it down into topics. So if you break down those 100 action items by their theme, we see that community access and outreach, workforce, and data are kind of the big 3 pillars that make up the vast majority of this plan. Those are the big focus. And as you can see, it's a pretty healthy mixture of inward-facing and outward-facing topics. Workforce obviously being kind of inward-facing as well as management and leadership, but things like contracting and community outreach, of course, being more externally facing. So this spring 2020, I conducted and compiled a progress update of the 100 racial equity plan action items, making sure we had an updated status for fiscal year 2019-20. And so that we found in this update that 8 out of the 100 have been completed, 54 are ongoing, 23 are on hold, and 15 are not started. And I think it's worth noting and important, you know, with some hindsight, you see 54% ongoing, so very high number. But many of those ongoing items could be perhaps framed or envisioned as enduring, long-lasting best practices rather than singular, discrete benchmarks to meet. So that is to say, it's possible we could permanently incorporate many of those items that fall under the ongoing category and incorporate them into bureau organizational and workplace culture permanently, rather than thinking about them as a measurable action item with a distinct beginning and end. So that's just kind of hindsight, and it's a good lesson for the future to distinguish between best practices and measurable concrete items. So that was something I found interesting looking at the progress report. Another way to think about the plan is to look at it by division. So how are people responsible? How is the responsibility doled out for the plan? So this shows that we see a huge concentration of plan responsibility kind of centered in operations and strategy, as well as the equity inclusion team just called out by themselves with 20% or 20 of those action items really, you know, dedicated to that team. It's interesting when we look at progress, you know, not started and on hold versus complete and ongoing. It's pretty mixed throughout the Bureau. One interesting area, for example, you can see is assets and development has a very low proportion of not started and on hold items. So that's one interesting example. And a lot of that has to do with the variety of 2014 replacement bond and contracting related action items associated with assets and development that a lot of headway was made on, because a lot of capacity and resources were dedicated to those things. So when we look at maybe mixed progress in other areas, perhaps operations and strategies or recreation, we think about some of the things Nicola mentioned with the vast turnover in our leadership, some of the budget crises that we navigated. And so I think that's important to keep those in mind too. And I think another thing that kind of blew my mind when I realized it is that there's 3 very small teams, not divisions, but teams that make up 67% of the action items that manage 67% of the plan. And those three small teams are our equity and inclusion team, our workforce development team, and our community relations team. So Kenya, Margaret, and Tim Collier's teams. And when you add up the full-time, the FTE, the full-time equivalent for those three small teams, it's roughly 25 people, 25, 30 people. And so when you think about 67% of the entire plan being tackled by 25 people, for whom this work, is in addition to their primary responsibilities, I just think it's important to know that, obviously these teams experience changing or new leadership, new staff, vacancies, capacity challenges, while at the same time really pushing forward on this work. And so, obviously we've had mixed progress across the board, but I personally am really proud from what I've seen and heard from these small teams and everywhere across the Bureau for kind of doing what they can with the capacity they've had. And lastly here, before I turn it over to Kenya, I want to just highlight a couple progress points, some things that we can hang our hat on or use as examples in the future for accomplishments when we think about moving forward. As Nicola mentioned, we did hire a new training coordinator in 2019, and ultimately she will really help in our effort to facilitate timely racial equity training within the Bureau, kind of speaking to your conversation earlier on the bylaws. We've been able to integrate racial equity best practices into the hiring process that resulted from our 2016 recreation arbitration. That was an area highlighted within the plan that had been completed. We also increased the percentage of our full-time employees who are folks of color, identify as people of color, from 17% in 2014 to 29% in 2019. There are a suite of workforce-related equity items in this plan that relate to that specifically. We've been able to begin to construct and build new parks to address park deficiencies in areas of Cully and East Portland neighborhoods, including Cully, Lewitt View, Gateway Discovery, and Park Lane parks. And then I had mentioned the contracting. One great example of that in fiscal year 2018-19, we contracted with our disadvantaged, minority-owned, women-owned, emerging small businesses or veteran-owned construction, professional services firms at a rate of 46%, which is more than double the city's 20% goal. So those are a couple examples of progress or complete action items from the plan itself over this last 4 years. And so I think now will be a good time to hear from Kenya. As I said, he had started his new role just last month, but had been here at the inception of this plan. So has really great insight and a really great perspective on this work. I'll stop sharing here.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Riley.
Oh, yeah.
That was great. And one thing, when I was the equity and inclusion specialist in my prior tenure at Parks, one thing that was really apparent was that there was no true tracking and reporting mechanism entered into the request from OEHR that we, as far as all bureaus, needed a racial equity plan. So it's fascinating and exciting to see all the work that Riley has done as far as breaking out a very dense racial equity plan and being able to provide that type of data. One thing I'll have to say, we're ending the period of that 5-year racial equity plan, and there are a lot of things that may not have been started yet. And part of this evaluation that myself and other members in the Bureau will conduct, we really have to think about what needs to be tabled possibly, and also look at all those things that are in process to officially see them as best practices, and also communicate that to the Bureau. I think there's some great things happening, as Riley mentioned, when it comes to contracting. We're double what is required by the city's racial equity goals, but that doesn't mean we should stop. If we're doing a great job recruiting and we have a number saying, oh, we're gonna you know, increase diversity through recruitment, we're going to hit, you know, 30% or, you know, 25%, you know, that doesn't mean we stop. You know, this racial equity plan is a guide, but it's not a check the box process. And I don't think we should position ourselves in any way to do that. That being said, you know, there's an opportunity to revise a lot, but there's also the opportunity to look at the next 5 years. And I think with the great data collection and analysis, you know, we will have a great opportunity to take advantage of staff that we have now that we did not have before, where we can move forward in creating a plan that really echoes the current affairs. When we now talk about, you know, specifically BIPOC communities, during the creation of this plan, a lot of focus was on immigrant and refugee communities. And we've done some great work, you know, in serving those, the immigrant and refugee communities. Now, you know, we definitely need to kind of reimagine the plan and start thinking about, you know, the current state of affairs with our BIPOC communities. We also need to think about how do we help everyone do this work. As Riley mentioned, you know, 25 people in the Bureau in Operations and Strategies. It's myself and, you know, 3 others, you know, I'll say 4 others too, with Riley's help and a few others. That's a lot of work, and it's not just equity inclusion work is not just the work of, you know, a handful of folks. You know, we really have to think about the plan where it definitely serves as a guide that can basically provide the guidance for everyone in our Bureau, where they can take ownership of doing equity and inclusion work in the Bureau. That being said, you know, the equity and inclusion team, we're not experts in every field. You know, we're focused on equity and inclusion. So it's very important that, you know, when we start to think about the next iteration of this plan, that divisions can take proper ownership, and folks within their divisions can also start to think about how they apply equity to their work, because they are the subject matter experts in their particular field. So those are a few quick things, you know, thinking about the future of this plan, thinking about the next iteration of this plan, and how we, as an equity and inclusion team, we started within the short month that I've been back, started to think about, let's you know, go back to the drawing board. Let's see what's going to really complement our Bureau in a way that also considers, you know, the current state of affairs, but also the energy that is behind a lot of the work that we really need to do when it comes to serving, you know, all of our communities, and also pushing equity and inclusion throughout the Bureau.
Thank you, Kenya.
You're welcome.
Any questions?
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. This is a great summary. I love to see how equity is percolating through the branches of government. I have a question about contracting, and can you, in my line of work, which is research and the healthcare, there is also a big push for equity. Can you give me an example of how are we promoting equity when we look at contracts specifically? Like, for instance, I don't know, I was trying to envision, like, let's say there is some kind of contract and there's 2 applicants and one is a representative of a minority. How does that get balanced? You know what I mean? How are we making sure that we're hiring the best people for the job, but also maintaining diversity. Am I clear? Like, are we helping people of minorities with the application? Are we giving them extra points if they're a minority? How does it get done?
Okay.
This is Adina. Maybe, Claudio, are you on the phone? Are you on the call?
Yeah, no, I am.
Or Lauren?
Yeah, I think since the bulk of our contracting, is on the capital side, Lauren, do you want to talk a little bit about the capital contracting?
Sure. Hi, this is Lauren McGuire. I'm Asset Development Division Manager. So what we do is we work pretty tightly with procurement. Procurement has many different contracting groups set up that help facilitate the contracting of disadvantaged minority, emerging small businesses, veterans, all those minority groups. So there's a group there's staff within procurement that have established, working with the state, they've established a list of contractors that qualify for being in that group. We prioritize trying to hire those people as much as we can. There are monetary limits on how much you can contract with them, and you can only have one contract running at a time. So we do that. It's the same thing with our consultants. We have prioritized in making a consultant list that we have done through procurement, how they're going to incorporate minority people within their teams. And so that's another way that we do it. We also go out for specific RFPs for larger projects that give people additional points that are contractors that are applying for the job to be a contractor on a site. If they've included additional subcontracting participants that are in one of those categories as well. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. That's great. Thank you.
And also I'll jump in with, on the non-capital side, particularly for professional, technical, and expert contracting, the city does have a program that allows folks that require services to procure services from certified businesses, that are on the state list of MWSB contractors to the state, allows them to procure those directly with very informal competitive processes and often just directly up to $100,000. So that's a state program that is facilitated by the citywide procurement group that allows a great speed and flexibility in terms of contracting, and that is only with the certified vendors.
The other thing that we do is we do go out into the community. There's a group, the National Association of Minority Contractors, for example, that meet periodically, and we go and present what projects are upcoming so that they can be aware of that, and we encourage them to participate. We also have changed our process so that we have a pre-meeting that we go over all the parameters in the project, and that helps them to understand what the project is so they can do a better bid for us. So that's just some of the things that we do.
And just adding to that, I think that a lot of this work is at, I know the Lawrence team does a lot of that, but it's really, a lot of it is feeding into the citywide procurement efforts. I mean, I think that there is a group in Office of Management and Finance's procurement section that is very specifically charged with expanding the pool of diverse contractors. So, and they're really a huge support to all bureaus in the city in terms of expanding our utilization of MWSB contractors.
Yeah, there's one other thing that we do working with procurement is we do alternate contracting processes that we have to go through council on. And that would be similar to, instead of going for a low bid, typically, we'll go and ask for a construction manager, general contractor, or something, and we can put lots of requirements and parameters within that process that will allow us to do things like apprenticeships or local area business utilization or DMW ESB contractors.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for a really nice presentation and also for a really good question, Juan, and great responses from Claudio and Lauren. That brings us to looking ahead to our next meeting, and I'm curious, besides the bylaws renewed conversation, what else would people like to see on our agenda for September?
Paul, I'm going to take the opportunity to remind folks that with the materials Brooke sent out in advance of this meeting, she included a Bureau Director monthly report, which I encourage everyone to take a look at if they have not done so already. And it may inform some future topics for meetings on the staff side. So just I want to flag that that we're going to start doing some monthly reporting so that we can save time at this meeting for your business.
One thought in terms of something I'd like to kind of learn about continuously.
Thank you, Adina. That's it.
Can you hear me? Okay. Is some maybe like feedback or insight from people working on the ground, especially with like maybe Portland Parks cleanups or, you know, just people who are kind of on the front lines of parks right now and hearing how things are going and if Adina or Kenya or others have an idea of who might be able to speak to how Parks is doing in terms of their racial equity plans and how they might feel as staff members. Obviously it's challenging. They're presenting to a big group of people and I don't expect them to be 100% authentic, but I think, yeah, just hearing a little bit more from on the ground staff members, I think would be helpful for me.
So this may not take the place of this, but you may recall that last month we did 2 listening sessions and discussions with all staff related to the racial justice movement, I guess, in response to the recent murders of Black people. And Riley, who you heard from earlier, has done some work to compile the comments and feedback that we received from those work sessions, those listening sessions. And he also then has begun collating comments and feedback that we heard through the employee surveys. My hope was to take those 2 items and continue the conversation. And I think that those will actually be really informative if there's a way for us to share that information without identifying participants. You know, I look forward to sharing that with the board at some point. We're just not quite there yet. And I imagine that it might also be work that the future community development or committee that shall be named in the future might be interested in learning a little bit more about. I'm not sure how it would work to have field staff come, and I don't know how we would choose people, but we'll noodle on that for a bit.
Thank you, Adina. And in the chat box, we've got from Casey just an update on the levy bullet points. So thank you for reiterating that for us. Anyone else? Well, please feel free to send along recommendations and thoughts between now and the next couple of weeks as we start to pull the agenda together for next month. And we'll sort that out. And if it doesn't get onto next month's agenda, that doesn't mean that we dropped it. It just may show up in October. So look forward to that input. That's all that I had. So we're going to be able to adjourn a little bit early today by 3 minutes. Woohoo. And thanks everyone for a good board meeting. And I look forward to hearing from you about topics. Anything else before we close?
Paul, I just want to thank Kenya and Riley and Nicola for their presentations today. I know that it's been a while since the board heard some progress reports in these areas, so I hope that they were useful. And I want to remind folks that if you're interested in digging a little bit deeper on any of those high-level report outs, just to let Paul know, and we'll figure out what the best venue is for doing so. Thank you.
Great, Adina, thank you. I do look forward to the executive summary that Nicola was going to share, and if we have other follow-up for Kenya or Riley, we'll ask for that as well. So, all right, everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.